So here's a Mandela effect. I've never seen anyone else cover it. I was watching this movie Poltergeist, the original 1982 Poltergeist. Okay, so the house in Poltergeist, what was it built on? I'm going to give you a second here to think about that, or even hit pause, get your thoughts together. But what was that house in Poltergeist built on? All right. Now, if you said an ancient Indian burial ground, you would be wrong. The house in Poltergeist was totally not built on an ancient Indian burial ground. They reference ancient Indian burial ground in it. They say, after all, it's not ancient tribal burial ground. Okay, it's not built on a regular cemetery with coffins and headstones that were removed, but it's not an Indian burial ground. It's just like a regular cemetery. Alright, so let's get right into it here. Poltergeist, ancient Indian burial ground. There is no Indian burial ground in Poltergeist. That's from 2016. Okay, that's because people the only mention of the film was that shot that I just showed you there, a joke that they made. There is no Indian burial ground in Poltergeist. This one says, why was every horror film in the 80s built on an ancient Indian burial grounds, except there wasn't one in Poltergeist? Okay, there was one in the Amityville Horror, and there's a couple other movies I'll show you here in a second. Alright, and here's some great residue. 2006 Family Guy, there was an episode entitled Poltergeist, where the family patriarch Peter Griffin discovered an ancient Indian burial ground in his backyard, and it was called Poltergeist. Alright, so clearly they are playing up on Poltergeist having an ancient Indian burial ground, that's what the house was built on. Okay, and I'll just mention right now too, there's also a movie called Poltergeist, a trauma horror film from the 90s, I believe, maybe early 2000s, but it's about a chicken joint that's built on an ancient Indian burial ground, and it is called Poltergeist. And another movie that it definitely happened in was in Pet Sematary. That was animals, but they were on an ancient Indian burial ground too. And of course, I would be neglecting my duties if I didn't mention also the hotel in The Shining was built on an ancient Indian burial ground. So Pet Sematary, The Shining, and the Amityville Horror, but not Poltergeist. And as is in the case of many Mandela effects, I see The Simpsons parodied it too, with Homer buying their house was built on an ancient Indian burial ground, and it's got like Geronimo, Pocahontas, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, etc. The gravestones in the basement, and then Homer complains to the guy that sold him the house. So that looks like that could also, I suppose you could say it's an Amityville thing, but I'm more leaning towards that's a Poltergeist parody myself. Alright, so this is coming up a lot. This is really interesting to me here too. It says they're talking about the whole trope of the ancient Indian burial ground, and the story begins with something of a bombshell. Poltergeist does not actually contain an Indian burial ground scene, no matter, get this, no matter what people may think they remember. Alright, so that's clearly, this is the Mandela effect. People remember an ancient Indian burial ground. I remembered it too. As I was watching it, I'm like, okay, they're going to say that the house was built on an ancient Indian burial ground. And they make the one line about a joke about it's not built on one. But I remember it being built on one. I clearly do. So, yeah, the Turner Classic Movies in the description says that the house was built on an ancient Indian burial ground. They are totally wrong. So here's a post on the Straight Dope message boards, and the movie Poltergeist had them situated atop one of them pesky ancient graveyards. Later on though, someone does correct them that the ghosts in Poltergeist aren't Native Americans. It's a graveyard is Christian, presumably filled with Caucasian corpses. See, the question is, why does everybody remember that Poltergeist was built on an ancient Indian burial ground, the house? So yeah, here's a blog on, it's a blog on haunted house movies, and they mentioned that Craig T. Nelson in Poltergeist is the father who moves his family into a California suburb built on a Native American burial ground. And there's actually like so many references to Poltergeist being on taking place, the house being built on an ancient Indian burial ground, that I can't really cover all of them, but there's a blog about the so-called Poltergeist curse, about how several people in the movie died really young, like the little girl and the older sister, and they mention that the house sits atop a ancient the house sits atop a Native American burial ground. So yeah, a few months ago, somebody said America sure is having some bad luck. It's almost like it was built on an ancient Indian burial ground, and someone responded, "This made me laugh so hard and totally imagine that scene in Poltergeist with the swimming pool." Well, that scene, the bodies were from a regular cemetery, not an ancient Indian burial ground. And one of the purest forms of residuals is memes. People remember because your house is built on an ancient Indian burial ground. And hashtag Poltergeist. News article about home sellers don't have to tell buyers about murders. Isn't that what the movie Poltergeist was about, when they built a development on an ancient Indian burial ground? So yeah, it's this comes up over and over and over again in Google. The ancient Indian burial ground plus Poltergeist is 5,000 hits alone. And like I said, it's not in there. It never was, but it's a memory that many of us had, including myself. Even this weekend, I was watching it and I expected to see ancient Indian burial ground, but it's totally just built on a regular cemetery. Thanks for watching, and subscribe for more Mandela effects.